I had to navigate the fears.
Mm-hmm.
And the fears were that my life would completely change. And I loved my life as it was.
Mm-hmm.
The second fear was that I would lose absolute total control. And then the third one was that I would be irrevocably bad. That somehow that was just the nature of me, that I was yeah, that I was put together wrong, I was built wrong, I was constructed wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a little while just sitting with those fears. And then the question for me came of what's most important.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of The Soul Inspired. Today we have Kristin Kirk with us. She is an international healer and spiritual teacher. So I'm really excited to get information about what she does and who she is. First of all, I just want to appreciate your time, Kristin. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much. I'm totally delighted to be here.
I love this. We also found out you're in Hawaii, I believe. So that's amazing. I'm not. I wish I was. I usually start each conversation somewhat the same way. And I'm looking at you from who you are now, but I want to go back to little Kristin, who you were. So who you started out as a human in this world. And if you were similar as a child, if I could just get a little information about who you were as a child and kind of what led you into your awakening.
There are so many chapters to that response. The little Kristen was happy and joyous, totally delighted to be alive. And entering school and interfacing with other people, other parents, I started to recognize um, that a lot of people thought of children as not intelligent somehow, that they knew more than children did. And it was this very odd thing when I kind of realized that oh, that person doesn't think I understand the world. That's fascinating. So there was this definite moment of just recognition of how the adult mind was so closed and limited, and then perceived the world from that way.
Hmm.
I haven't been asked this question before, so I haven't really gleaned through all these different little pivotal moments. Um, there was another moment when I was a teenager that I recognized something inside myself that I believed in terms of the world, which I found out in college was Taoism.
Mm.
And that there was this inner recognition of um, a balance that was happening in the world, and a pristineness and an inner, I don't even have words for that. I remember reading the Tao Te Ching and in college and saying, "Oh, that's what I believe. That's what I believe." So there was a moving out of a separate God above me kind of paradigm that happened.
Hmm.
I mean, that shift happened in when I was a teenager, and then in college when I read about that, that was the most resonant. And then that shifted to in my 20s. I had an kind of initial awakening that I didn't recognize what it was at the time, but I started having access to past lives and communicating with animals and plants. And that was an initial shifting of my sense of identity from my typical human mind identity into my soul identity, just that beginning shift. But it wasn't until it was 10 years after that that I had what I'm kind of referencing as my initial, like the bigger spiritual shift changed my healing practice, and I started seeing pictures coming out of people's bodies of all the traumas and who they were with and what happened and what
Wow.
part of the body it was connected to and why they had pain there, which then opened up to past lives, and then through all the different dimensions of consciousness, opening up to the larger and larger truth of who we are. So for me, the healing work and my spiritual awakening and self-realization have been completely in tandem.
Mm. Wow. Okay, so there is some similarities, but some non-similarities going on here. So you were a child that right away didn't recognize, like you were curious about the difference between children and adults and how they behaved with one another. And that those are things not all kids are thinking about. I'm just like, I always mention that I was the kid in class who would look around and wonder why people were being mean to one another. Like, why are you doing that? Like,
Right.
almost trying, and not like you shouldn't do that, that's mean, more like what is the outcome, what are you trying to achieve? And I didn't understand
Uh-huh.
why I would think that way, because and I would always be trying to help as many kids as possible. I'd be friends with the cool kids but protecting the non-cool kids, and then my cool kid friends would be confused, why is Joe like that, what are you doing? And so it was this constant battle as a child. And then into my teenage years, sounding like yours, you were a seeker. You were seeking more of who you were. It sounds like to me, that's what I got out of it, because you were venturing into you were already looking at your belief systems in your teenagers. Is that correct?
Well, it wasn't quite like that in that I wasn't seeking. There was an incident. I was brought up in a Christian religion, and 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 was going to a church camp. And there was something that happened there that pressed the issue,
Mm,
challenging me of what I believed. And it was that created that inner shift, because it forced a deeper inquiry.
okay.
And not because that inquiry was being asked of me. I wasn't being challenged in any way. And I totally loved this camp. It's like my favorite place to go. Um, but there was an incident that happened that just internally my response was to deeply question, like, wait a minute, what is actually really happening here? And it's not that I um had issues or challenges with what I was being the experience there or being taught.
Mm,
But so I hadn't been seeking.
okay.
I hadn't been seeking in that way. It just was a moment that created that, which was then a kind of life-changing inner, I think, trusting that inner voice, trusting that inside
Hmm.
place that guides us. And part of the awakening was opening up through that infinite I am, and recognizing that the separation between the small sense of me and the infinite I am that we all are was a construct, was
Mm-hmm.
a and so there's a gift of the individual experience, and that small self can relate to the big self as God, which is true. And in the awakening, there's a recognition that there's not actually a separation, the way that I was, the way that I understood I was separate from my background.
Mm,
So there are these different stages of what was happening. So it wasn't that I was turning away from the concept of God, or there was just a different orientation, which then allowed me to keep surrendering through into opening up to consciously, lucidly being all that we are, and opening up through all these layers where atoms are now not an abstract, separate concept for me. When I'm resting in that larger cosmic body of embodiment, I experience all the atoms of existence as my body.
mm-hmm.
and that all of us are made this way.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, and my awakening just has opened me up through these layers.
And it seems like the awakening, the big shift awakenings, we'll get into that in a moment, but this, I believe it was around your 30s then, from what you just mentioned. But, you said something profound there. You started trusting your inner voice. And you started trusting your inner voice in your teenage years, going into your 20s.
I actually trusted that inner voice my entire life, and I was
Wow.
aware of that. And it wasn't until much later that I realized this was a shock for me, that I realized most people didn't actually have that. Most people were not
Right.
actually, I mean, that blew my mind when
Hmm.
I realized that, because I always had that inner voice. And part of that awakening, there was an experiment that I ran on the inside, because I realized I had been trusting that voice my entire life with my life, but I was still actually choosing whether or not I listened. So, one of the experiments that I did internally was I invited that small voice that was in the back of me. I invited that to hop in the front seat and drive the car.
Mm.
That was what one of the elements that elicited my the larger awakening.
So you allowed it to take over.
Yeah. Yeah, I invited that from the back seat to the front seat in the driver's
Hmm.
seat to take the wheel.
Yeah. And
I did.
I believe most people, this is why that's a blessing, because majority of people, I believe, hold fear around that, mass amounts of fear, because they don't want to trust it. They don't know what to trust. I don't know why this happens. I'm just finding now, at my age now, how to decipher the difference between my inner voice and the chatter. And then, so now because I can notice the difference, now I can trust the inner voice. Because whereas before there was so much chatter that I didn't trust anything coming through. So I didn't go with anything coming through. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I would assume that a lot of people, that's the problem they have, is they're not quieting the mind, they're not quieting down enough to know the difference. And it sounds like you had this I call it a blessing of recognition of your inner voice pretty young. So you're able to move through that. You mentioned you started seeing pictures of people's past lives, things like this. Was this visuals that would come through to you? Did you have to learn how to enhance this gift? How did that start to come around in your 20s? I wanted to jump in with that a little bit.
Um, so when the images started coming with that larger awakening, that I started seeing them inside. It was like in my third eye, like in my inner vision, but
Mm.
I would see it in the person's body. And I would the a whole picture would open up. It would be full technicolor, have all the players in it. I would be aware of the thoughts and feelings and the dynamic of everyone in the vision, what happened, where the energy got lodged in the body, what the storyline was, what emotion got stuck where. And then I would also be aware of how to help heal that.
Mm.
So it started that way. And so I had that went on for about 7 months. And I was just getting validation from people. I was actually freaking people out because I'm reporting these very detailed things that were traumatic for them, where
Yeah.
something really significant happened. And so I was getting the validation. So there was a whole inner process that I went through during that time of trusting that process, because I couldn't control it. I couldn't make it happen. The only way it would happen was if I surrendered everything, surrendered my desire for healing, my desire for someone else's well-being, my professionalism, my attachment to outcome. I had to surrender thoughts into complete, absolute empty stillness. I
Mm.
had to surrender absolutely everything
Mm.
in order for those images to begin. And then when they did, so that's a whole story of like that practicing part, like for that to happen.
Hmm.
Um, which I'm actually writing a book about right now.
Wow.
But the yeah, I mean, I'm writing a book about the whole process and awakening and enlightenment. And so it was during those 7 months, I was testing things on the inside because I didn't want to speak something that wasn't true. And so I was developing on the inside this very refined subtlety of listening to and feeling the frequencies of things, the frequencies of the details of the images to make sure that I was accurate. And then once I had that fine tunedness happening on the inside, then I would speak and then I would share. But I was always sharing in the unknown because I had no idea. I had no idea if these things that I was seeing were true or not.
Right.
And so it was through that 7 month process that I was doing that inner work on the inside to be present, to be able to receive that and then receive it in a precision, very precise way. And then I was getting the feedback from people of the validation so that when I started seeing a little gold thread appear behind the image and open up with another image of a different time zone, time zone, right? Different time zone. I'm scheduling different podcasts, right? So there's different time zones, but a
Right.
different time period, different time in history,
Mhm.
different climate, different culture, different food. When I started having that second layer of imaging appear that other people couldn't validate, I had already really honed that level of precision on the inside so I could trust what I was seeing because I knew that frequency of truth. And so then from there, it just continued, and my own consciousness had to keep surrendering to be able to open to the soul layer and having access to people's past life memories and my own, and surrendering to deeper layers of the collective and seeing light grids and opening up with larger guides and larger storylines and galactic size memory of universes. And so all of
Mhm.
this stuff, and as I mentioned earlier, the atoms and cells and subatomic frequencies. I mean, for me, science and consciousness and life and love and our stories and physics and geometry, it's all actually one thing. It's just all one cohesive thing. And opening up into that, then yeah, we're the living miracle, right? We're
Mm.
just this astounding miracle that's happening.
Wow. We're the living miracle. I love that.
Yep.
That's a beautiful quote. I was gonna ask, so holy, okay, there's a lot of different things. I'm finding it fascinating that someone like yourself had this life experience so far, in that I've mentioned a lot of people that follow the Soul Inspired know that a lot of people I talk to have had near-death experiences, transformative experiences, or they've had loved ones come to them, those types of things, right? Especially the near-death experience, it's kind of a massive shift. You go from living your mediocre, I don't want to say mediocre, maybe that's ignorant to say, but your day-to-day standard lifestyle to something traumatic happening, and then your whole world shifts. This is why you see a lot of people come back and separate with their spouse or change their job or move to another country, or like there's so much changing so much so quickly because they don't know how to handle what they've just witnessed. You've done this in a more progressive nature, so you didn't have this, it was this progression all the way up until your 30s or whatnot. And you is what you just mentioned when you had this big awakening, is that what you were doing, like that 7 month time frame when you were learning to um, calm your own internal so you could receive messages from others? Is that what basically happened, or was there an event or something that really just sparked it wide open?
So there was a catalytic moment, which was the convergence of three different inner experiments that I was running simultaneously.
Okay.
That started because of a sense of absolute utter failure. So I had had my shiatsu massage practice. I was, had my clients coming, working 5 days a week, loved my work. And there was a inner calling that I was supposed to be doing something else. And so I studied with two different shamans, Mayan and West African, and another beautiful, also brilliant healer who did muscle testing. And so I started exploring, trying to find that work, that what that inner calling was like crying out for. And I was already seeing things behind the scenes because I had, 10 years earlier, less than that, I'm not sure. In my 20s, I had already been communicating with plants and animals and spirit guides and starting to remember some of my past lives. So I was already seeing behind the scenes. So working with the two different shamans, I was already seeing behind the scenes the beings that were showing up to enable the healing happening. So they were done through rituals and engaging elemental consciousness and these other beings, but I was seeing all that. So my questions were all about that, but no one was answering those questions for me.
Mm.
So I knew that I couldn't move forward in that because something different needed to happen in me, and I knew that.
Mhm.
And then when the muscle testing, which was um, I mean, all three of the people I studied with were extraordinary, right? Totally extraordinary healers. And the last person, when I discovered the muscle testing was going to be yes or no questions, which is brilliant and perfect in certain circumstances, right? Gorgeous healing techniques arise from that. It wasn't going to work for me because I just knew. I mean, the way I'm seeing now, I'm seeing, you know, trillions of bits of information at once. I can't ask yes or no questions about that. I have to be
Mhm.
able to see all that, understand it all, and respond at that same level of magnitude.
Mm.
So there was something, and I didn't know that at the time. I just started doing this muscle testing, and my whole being just collapsed. Like,
Wow.
oh no, this is not going to work. I can't do this. And so I'd been following this inner call. We talk about trusting that inner call, which had been guiding me my whole life to do crazy things that everyone would like not recommend me do, but the inner knowing was to do it. And it always turned out in extraordinarily well.
Mhm.
So this was the first time that I had trusted that voice, made all these outward actions, time, flights, money, bazillion weekends, all to learn this stuff. And then to come to this inner collapse on the inside
Wow.
of, oh no, I have failed that inner voice of source, that inner voice of God's or guides direct, God's guiding direction. And so there was this profound feeling of like, oh, holy shit, I have failed my life. That's like, it was awful. I don't have quite
Yeah.
enough words to describe that.
Yeah.
So part of the experiment was that movement. I was aware that movement and that driving purpose was arising out of my heart, kind of propelling me. And so I turned it around backwards and took that driving purpose and turned it around backwards with my hands open, like the way you'd give a gift back, it's like, and gave it back to my heart in this distraught place of, if voice that's compelling me to do this, if you want me to do this, you are going to have to do it
Mm.
because I can't, because I tried. So it was a profound inner sense of failure and collapse and turnaround of the way energy usually moves.
Mhm.
And that experiment, and I didn't collapse on the floor in a puddle of despair. It was actually an active, trusting, self-empowered in a way failure and collapse. Like it was an acknowledgement that the part of me that thought it could do something couldn't actually do it. And so it
Mhm.
was surrendering my volition,
Mm.
surrendering my idea of my capacity to act back in through my heart, back into the pathway from whence that
Mm.
arose from. So that was the really number one huge experiment. The second one we spoke about already, about that realizing that that voice I trusted to, that I trusted and listened to, that I wasn't fully trusting, so that I invited into the front seat. That was also number two experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're related, because I was always trusting that voice. And here it didn't guide me well. I couldn't do what I thought I was supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was what also elicited that awareness about keeping the I am, that voice in the back seat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the third experiment came because, with the invitation of inviting that small voice from the back seat to the driver's seat, um, uh, three enormous fears just overtook me. And so I then had a choice, that I knew I couldn't actually let that experiment run with having that small voice in the back drive the car if those fears were there. So I had to navigate the fears.
Mm-hmm.
And the fears were that my life would completely change. And I loved my life as it was.
Mm-hmm.
The second fear was that I would lose absolute total control. And then the third one was that I would be irrevocably bad. That somehow that was just the nature of me, that I was yeah, that I was put together wrong, I was built wrong, I was constructed wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a little while just sitting with those fears, and then the question for me came of what's most important. Is the truth most important, or is living with those fears the most important? Or is it more important to not run the experiment, and
Mm-hmm.
ultimately for me, truth won, and truth was more important. I wanted to know the truth. It makes me want to cry when I say this. And so there's such tenderness of, okay, if I am bad, if I am constructed, if I'm a disastrous creation in the universe, yeah, still makes me want to cry. I want to know that. If that's the truth, I want the truth.
Mm.
It was so powerful. And so with that inner acceptance, along with the previous sense of failure,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I could then, with the acceptance of that, I could let that small voice then drive. And I took those three fears, and I didn't heal them or change them or analyze them. I just set them aside. It was like the energetic material of them. I could see them and feel them almost as this energetic thing that I could then set off to the side. They didn't have to do anything. I wasn't judging them. I wasn't poking at them. I wasn't trying to do anything. I was like, okay, we're just going to set you aside. It's okay. The
Mm-hmm.
truth is the most important.
Mm-hmm.
And so all three of those happened all around the same time. I set those experiments running on the inside with 1,000% commitment. And then life continued. And nothing really seemed to change on the outside, which was fine, because like experiments run. You set the experiment and then you see what happens. And then sometimes it takes time. So you don't keep opening the oven door to see if the cake is baked or not.
Right.
You don't go pull on the little sprouts you're trying to grow to like see what they look like later. You just let it be. So
Mm-hmm.
there was a profound surrendering, a profound acceptance, a profound commitment to truth, and a profound trust, and a profound willingness. And so it was a few months later that I started then seeing pictures coming out of people's bodies. So
Wow.
that healing work that I knew needed to happen, but had no idea what it was, started on its own.
So you, at that point, there's a lot I'm just gonna throw in here. That was amazing. So at that point you started seeing what would lead you more into the healing aspect of who you are because you are seeing the pictures out of people and things like this that was leading you into the next direction. I just wanted to mention something. When you started speaking, I don't know why, but the word surrender came to me and the word control. And I wrote it down. I literally wrote surrender and control. You can't see it from here, but and then as you got talking, so I don't know if I'm aligned with what you're saying. This is what was going on. So you you were going through your life from a place of healing and from a place like you were who you were. And this is what I'm getting from your story as even as a child. Like you already were on this venture. But even and this is what I always try to relate it to the audience or to other people listening because we're all living our lives doing different things. And even though you had this kind of extraordinary lifestyle of things you were doing, it was just a little bit different. Um, everybody can find themselves at this place, right? They can
Right.
find themselves in a place where you need to let, I'm trying to think how to say this. Uh, I think control is a huge piece. I think a lot of us want to have some sort of control, even if it's the smallest piece. I think that's part of the human experience. But what's beautiful about another part of the human experience is the learning to let go of the control and allowing and surrendering your control so that things can just move in the direction they're supposed to. That doesn't mean get lazy or do nothing, but there's a piece of us that's constantly looking to grow and to keep going. But it's almost like thinking about that all the time and working at that, that actually is also part of the problem. You have to completely just surrender. I've been in two different parts of my life. There's been two different incidents in my life where I remember one time, for instance, I was working at a job that it was wrecking my soul. It was just destroying me internally. And I went in to go to work and instead I went out in the car and I had this, and I'm not super religious, I'm more spiritual in nature, but I had this crucifix in my car from wood from Jerusalem or somewhere had given me. And it's just hanging, like a car uh, thing. And I put my hand around it and I said internally, um, I give up. Like I'm surrendering. I'm completely giving up. I know that I can't fix this. So I'm going to allow, and I don't know what I was probably 23 at the time, so I didn't even know what I was surrendering. I didn't know what this any of this meant. I just knew I couldn't control the outcome, and I just put it out there that whatever's meant to happen, I'm allowing that in now. And within 2 months, my life shifted completely. I was out of that job. I was starting a business. I was in it, and I hadn't thought of it. I just had let go. So that was one incident, and that was a huge piece. That was a huge piece because I think I was going in a direction that wouldn't have been good for my soul. So it's similar, but it's different. You were kind of in that place. You were in this place of completely allowing yourself to completely withdraw from any of the control to say, okay, you know? And I just think a lot of people are fearful of that. It's very scary. Change is scary, especially if we're happy in our situations or we have an attachment. I don't, you mentioned that you liked your life, you were happy with it. Sometimes, I'm not saying this about you, but I think sometimes we just become attached to a lifestyle that feels comfortable. And then the idea of something changing is scary and fearful. So we hold on to it until our bodies give out, till we get little ailments, till, you know, do you agree with any of this or am I, this is just how I feel. This is kind of where I relate to what you're saying.
My mind has just kind of gone into a deep, empty space right now in our sharing as I was kind of sitting with your sharing and feeling you in your your moment in the car and having your life completely change. And um, so I just, the coming back to that place of surrender, that's the key element for me. I
Hmm.
mean, the surrender, it's all that ever, it's all that's ever happening on a certain level, is surrendering back into that truth. And um, so I don't know, I think you can ask your question again if you want, because I was in a deeper
Well,
space with you.
that's okay. No, I appreciate that. It's kind of a fine line really because part of me, believes that maybe we're not all meant to do this, but at least this is what I've always felt is that I felt that I did this with this podcast, the exact same thing where I was thinking of running a podcast for years and I could feel that nudge, that pull, and I had no idea what what the topics were going to be around. Everyone knows me as a musician, so they thought, "Oh, Joe, that's a great idea. You've got a great hosting voice, and you can talk about music." And I didn't allow any of that in because I didn't know why I was getting the pull. So what I did is I just said there was this inner sense of me that just let go of any vulnerability, any fear. I didn't go to what are people going to think about the conversations I have, right? If someone threw that out there, it was as if it wasn't there. And I just did. I'm speaking in improper language, but I just did it. I just did what I felt was happening. And I wouldn't change it for anything now because I love these conversations. So it's the same thing. It turned into this more of a podcast around healing and conversations for the soul, as I call it. And this all came from a sense of letting go. I didn't think about these things. It was
Right.
absent of thought. It was doing. So there's this fine line of we are here to experience this suit we're wearing and to do the things we do. And we want some sense of control, because we do the things. We lift my cup so I can have my drink. We get up, we go out with friends, these types of things. So there's that, but then there's the idea of just surrendering over to do what's the inner calling. And you have to take action, of course, but I think it's more about understanding or hearing those proper messages and deciphering the difference between the chatter, like I said, and this is what you need to do. I've been saying lately that, and I'm getting the sense of the messages that are good for me and are harmful for me, and the ones that are good for me seem to be very direct, without, and this sounds weird, without emotional attachment. It's just a direct, like I can have my emotional attachment, like I can have an emotional reaction, but I don't. If I feel something, it's like direct. It's like okay, that's something, and I didn't hear that before. Does that make any sense? And you being someone who speaks with people on this level or in a spiritual nature, maybe you understand that more.
Yeah, I mean, I had the blessing of having those direct messages all along,
Mm,
but I completely understand what you're saying in that inner experience as we begin to discern the difference between chitter chatter and that direct message.
hmm
For me, there was a that exploratory phase when I was really practicing that deep listening to whether something was true or not. And the quality of it is different. And
hmm
I love that you're naming that, right? In that you're aware that quality comes through. There's a precision. It sometimes is super quick, and there's a lot of information in one fraction of a nanosecond. Like you're wondering, how does all that information come into that small little moment of contact?
Right.
So it's direct. There's that quality of lack of attachment where that guiding truth doesn't try to make you do one thing or another or offer its opinion in one way or another. It just has that quality of truth just comes in. And the mind can spend hours or years arguing with that little bit of information. But but because it was true, our soul recognizes it was true. Our heart recognizes it was true. That depth of us recognizes that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's starting to pay attention to those subtleties. The level of vision and access and healing and communication I have now is just, you know, I don't even know to say how exponential
Yeah.
beyond those beginning stages. But in those beginning stages, it was subtle.
Mm-hmm.
I had to focus. The way you squint your eyes, I was squinting my ears, like,
Yeah,
wait,
right.
what was that? Where
Mm-hmm.
was that? Like just having to really intensely focus, and until it became so familiar that I would then just hear that all the time. It was like my perception just learned that frequency station, that radio station. So you just can live with open guidance to the truth of yourself because you've practiced tuning into that station on the inside. And just as you said, the recognition of that station, that it doesn't have an opinion, it doesn't judge, and it always has that quality of pristine, unattached truth.
Mm-hmm. And I love all that. And I was gonna say it also doesn't make you feel bad. It doesn't make
Correct.
right those, when you get those, and I also notice the more you become aware of these type of messages, that the other thoughts or chatter that come in, um, at least for me, I've found I don't hold a space for it as often anymore. So, and that includes someone cutting me off on the road or, um, whereas I might sit with that for an hour before or a half hour. God, this guy, he was driving, now it's like, yeah, I'm human. I'll have the moment and it's gone. Because I know it doesn't serve me. It doesn't generally serve me in any positive way. I'm still going to accept that it was a moment and an emotional reaction, but I don't hold the space for it the same as I used to, because now I'm listening to inner guidance is the way I'll say it. And that to me is more representative of who I want to become and who I'm moving forward into being. And so I think a lot of us are in that place. And I think that's why I said earlier to you that I feel like I'm kind of in this beginning stage of it, because it's not new to me. I think it's always been there, but the recognition of what I'm hearing or feeling, I wasn't aware of it. So it's like tuning in and becoming more aware, and I want to say one more thing. I think one of the reasons why I wasn't paying much attention to that before is because I've never really disliked who I am. I've always thought of myself as a really good person. I've loved everybody. I continue to love everyone. I'm a good human being. I think I've done this dance a few times. I've said that many times. I feel it. So there was this fear of, I don't want to change my personality. I don't want to become someone just sitting under a tree all day and not really aware of my surroundings. So there's this inner fear of losing myself. So I think a lot of people who are trying to awaken or have their own spiritual awakening or their own just personal awakening, I think that fear can come in.
Yeah. There are a couple things I wanted to jump back to with that. When you're talking about the driving, it just reminded me that I used to drive in my 20s, and I just assumed I had all these emotional experiences driving. And as my vision got clearer, I started to see, oh, that's anger driving up behind me and driving by.
Mm,
Oh, that's grief over in the car next to me. And so, as you're speaking about, you're letting these things go faster, having a driving moment where someone's, whatever's happening, right? That's an aggressive moment, that you're able to find the new station, the higher frequency station in yourself, radio station, more easily and not get caught up in that. And the other part I wanted to add to that is that as we deepen that in ourselves, then we can respect other people's radio stations. So if someone wants to be playing anger, pissed offness, they get to do that. And it doesn't have to actually make your inner radio station resonate with it.
Mm,
even for a nanosecond. So what you're speaking about is when your inner station starts to resonate with that person's station for a moment, like it's blasted at you, and then your system goes, oh yeah, I know that, well, no, I'm not going to go there, right? And then you
mhm.
shift. So there's a point, the more that you play with this, where you respect everyone else's reality creation choice,
Yeah.
and you step more into your own sovereign reality creation choice to keep aligning with those deeper frequencies, which changes how you perceive things. It changes your responses. It changes your inner world. It totally changes your life.
Yeah.
So, and also I wanted to link back to those three fears of those, it changes your life. So my
Mhm.
fear of listening, that it would change my life, was true. And hallelujah, my life changed in extraordinary ways.
Mm.
So just kind of linking back, it's like the fears we have some level of truth, but they're only true from a limited perspective. And when we trust and open and really let that deeper knowing step forward, there are magnificent things we could never even imagine that start to unfold. And maybe they look disastrous in the beginning, like when you're speaking about people suddenly losing their or stepping out of their relationships because they don't fit anymore. So it might in the big, it doesn't always have to happen that way, but sometimes those things happen. And if we stay steady with that inner resonance and that higher frequency place, it sustains us through the things that might appear challenging that are actually the stepping stone to something far more magnificent than we could ever even imagine in our wildest dreams.
Mhm. What does someone do if they find themselves in that place and fear starts to grab a hold of them? So they're making those changes in their lives, right? But there are things that are coming up that seem catastrophic at the time. Is it a good recommendation to, like a lot of people bring up meditation and tools they can use, things they can do to try to, because I'm trying to see how I can help someone while that's going on. Because when you're in that space, you can easily falter back to, like, you could be just moving in the direction you're supposed to be moving and fear hold you back, and then and it doesn't happen. So I'm always trying to figure out how people can allow shifts to happen without being so fearful. Do you have any suggestions for that at all? Anything you've done?
Yeah, the first thing is to actually recognize that fear is starting to make your decisions.
Hmm.
Is just to so the first is that recognition, or recognition that this doesn't feel good, right? There's going to be some inner prompt that catches your attention that normally we might sort of set aside and still, well, no, you've got to show up at work and do your job, or no, you can't take a moment in the midst of an argument to say, can I have a pause here? Can we just stop for a minute?
Hmm.
Or
Yeah.
I need a break, or like, so the first thing is honoring the inner prompt. And so when that fear comes up, that can just be the inner prompt to actually then stop and open and invite a deeper frequency to come forward.
Mm.
Have so that you're not trying to turn off the fear or judge it or push it aside, that there's an honoring of it and a pause. And then taking the that inner pause to change radio stations, to find that inner frequency that has that quality of unconditional love and truth and embrace, that's
Mm.
not judging, that is infinitely wise. And so people can access that truth of themselves in an infinite number of ways because we're infinite beings. And it's going to be different for different people. For some person, it might be they take out a piece of paper and colored markers and they just start doodling. They just start doing that to let their mind turn off. Someone else might go for a run or meditate or pray or put on devotional music that helps shift them into a
Mm-hmm.
different frequency. So that surrendering and the letting go is key, where whatever the situation is that's got you gripped is what you take a pause from and just let it go for the moment to open up into a deeper truth,
Mm.
and then allow that to respond. And the more that we can practice that on our own when we're not under stress, the more readily available that is when we are under stress and it's harder, when it's harder to find.
Mm. I love how you mentioned the tools in order to turn to ways to turn off the mind a little bit. Music has been mine. I've said it many times. I actually just released an album 2 days ago, yesterday, 2 days ago, and because there was massive shifts in my life over the last 4 years, and in those 4 years, in the moments, they were very difficult. But in those moments, I was freestyle writing. I was grabbing my phone, recording a song, going on the computer, recording a song. And now I had to release them all. I didn't want to. It's very vulnerable, but I have to. I didn't want to, but I do want to because I know I have to release those energies. But in those moments, looking back now, it was in those moments that I was able to calm my mind and allow myself to realize, no, I'm moving in the right direction. This will be okay. Everything will be okay. So art is beautiful for that, whether it's music, writing, could be, like you say, even scribbling. I've had people do scribbling and say that they'll scribble and look back and they go, "Oh my God," and they've drawn something. Something just came from their mind. So and it shifts your mindset and gets you back on track. So I just love how you mentioned that, but also recognizing that the fear is making decisions for you. That's huge. That's a hard one for a lot of people, though. It really is a hard one because we get stuck in it right away, especially if we've been raised that way or we've had that kind of stuff around us, right? There's a lot of shifting that has to happen. You mentioned before that you did mention. I just wanted to bring this up because you did mention it that you're writing a book. Is it on the things that you've gone through in your life, or is it over like a particular time period in your life?
I actually started writing a book. There was a series of books a number of years ago on the process of how to support yourself awakening and not spiritually bypass. And so I have all of that partially written and outlined. And then something shifted for me last year, and I started writing an entirely different book that I had never even imagined I would write. And that's going to be the first one that will be the first one that's finished. Um, and I'm writing about awakening and the multidimensional nature of what we all are, but I'm writing about it in the gradual way that it unfolded for me. Because the truth of what
Mm,
we are is so beyond what people can even imagine. The truth of the magnificence of what we are. And so for me, just to start sharing that, the mind kind of shuts down because it just doesn't have space. It doesn't have the reference points to put all the pieces together to really deeply get what I'm saying,
mm-hmm.
you know? And so this book started writing itself, as you're naming that earlier, where your language starts to speak the truth, where there's no doer, right? I mean, you said something about your grammar, but your grammar in a certain way was accurate because there wasn't a subject in there. There was the verb of being and the verb of doing. And
Mm-hmm.
so this book started writing itself about Kristin's experiences through these steps, through my sessions with clients and the details of what I was seeing of past lives and dimensions and gods and goddesses and
Mm-hmm.
all those details. So the writing is to bring people through that kind of amazing story of what was unfolding in a gradual way to bring people in touch in themselves to the magnificence of what we all are. So I have this extraordinary vision, but people don't have to have that extraordinary vision to
Mm-hmm.
actually wake up to that truth in themselves
Mm-hmm.
and feel the joy of the extraordinary miracle that's actually happening. And there's help for transforming all of the layers of conditioning that are connected with our fears and the reasons we choose limitation over choosing infinite possibility. So that's what it's about. It's like I'm trying to flesh out the larger structure of what we are through the awakening and healing experience as I went through it.
I love how you described it like the book was healing, writing itself, because that's how I write. It's the same thing over all the years. When I try to teach my students how to write music, it's like, hey, there's two ways we can approach this. Do you want to approach it the way I approach it and really get deep, or do we want to do it from this place? And some of them, they experiment with both ways. But when something's writing itself, it's because you're tuning into something. You're tuning into something that, and I also I speak to people at NDEs and they come back and they're trying to explain their experience, and you can just see the frustration trying to use human words to explain what they've seen. And then I get deep into it, and then sometimes it gets even frustrating for me because I can't say what I'm feeling exactly. And I don't know, I was just resonating with that as you were saying it. Is this, when the book is available, is it on a website? Do you have a website or anything that people can connect with you, or how do they get in touch with you if they're waiting to see when this book would come out?
Yeah, I have a website and it's my name. And there are three vowels in it that are all all eyes. So it's like your third eye. So it's Kristin Kirk with three eyes.
Oh, wow.
Kristin,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, KristinKirk.com.
Okay.
And on there you can sign up and um, access some free healing transmissions. And I do a monthly live stream healing where I'm opening up in through what I call the soul classroom, where I'm seeing everyone's souls, I'm seeing their conditioning, their
Mm.
trauma, their lifetimes, their karma, their enlightened self, their highest possibility, and
Mhm.
working with each person individually in that large soul classroom to help accelerate the healing and awakening process for everybody.
I'm going to bring back just a quick question that I'd written down because you just mentioned this and I'd forgot to ask you this. And it was, do we bring energies into this incarnation from other lives? I want to say past lives, but I'm starting to understand that past doesn't mean past. I don't really, I almost see like things are happening all at once. But is there, because sometimes people get ailments and they wonder, where did that come from? And I do believe that some of us aren't really dealing with this, the things going on here, but something more from, so we have our physical body, we have our energy body. And if we're not in touch with our energy body, we can't heal that energy body. That's just the way I'm seeing it. So I'm wondering if you sense that in people, if people need to heal through other lives, it might not have anything to do with what they're currently going through here. Do you ever get that when you're working with people?
Right. So I'm already seeing everything holographically. So I'm seeing all of those layers inseparably from each other. So when I see the physical piece, I see the past life piece and I see the past life patterning, and then I see the larger paradigm of the human collective psyche and how it's all interwoven. So when I'm doing the healing addresses all of those layers,
Mm,
which is why it's accelerated, because we are opening up to a profound depth of the root of all of that.
mm.
So I just don't see them as separate. So the issues that people are dealing with in this lifetime are are part of a perfection of the whole mandala of their consciousness, of the evolution of their healing and self-realization process that's underway.
So you see it from our higher self perspective already, not just from this specific, maybe I'm using the wrong terminology, but you, when you're looking at someone and someone's trying to heal, you're not just seeing it as Joe in 2024 sitting here like this individual. You're seeing it as me as a whole piece of who I am spiritually.
Yes. I'm going to give an example, and we'll see how this goes.
Okay.
So, because there's some anatomy that I experience. So I call this your core flow, or this core inner alignment of truth that is actually infinite source consciousness that we get to experience as ourself in multiple layers of embodiment. And so if you think of that core flow as an elevator shaft,
Hmm.
and you're seeing on the bottom floor of your humanness, when you shift through layers of that sense of self, or that sense of I am, when you surrender that human I am, the way it happened for me in the beginning, then I open to next floor of the building, seeing through the soul level and seeing all of my past lives and seeing everyone else's past lives.
Mm.
And then take the elevator up to the next level, and then seeing from a more collective perspective of that wholeness, and take the elevator up another level and seeing it from devas and enlightened beings and layers of consciousness that are higher frequency than that, and then take one more elevator, ride up to then seeing gods and goddesses and forces of reality creation and universes being created, and then take that another elevator level up. So when I'm doing the healing work, I am opening through those different levels of embodiment that we all are.
Hmm.
Everyone has this. I'm not different in this way. And I'm seeing from those higher elevator floor levels, and the floors are translucent, right? Are transparent, right? You can see through them.
Hmm.
So from that higher place, you see the whole thing. So from there, I see everyone's layers of their soul, their enlightened self, their karma, their DNA, their conditioning, and see it all in those layers of creation, and where they're stuck, where they need help, how they need help to shift and reconfigure back into that conduit where you can then start having access, more easier access to all these layers of yourself. And so you don't have to see all those layers to be living from that in a
Right.
joyous way. It's where all that bliss comes from, and happiness. And when we open to that and see that perfection, or people who've had these near-death experiences, right, they're going to be completely overwhelmed because they went from the ground level of their elevator to way high up in that elevator, and
Mm.
things are different there.
Yeah.
There isn't judgment. There's infinite love. There's seamlessness of people's thoughts. You don't have to have conversations. It's all telepathic oneness in self-awareness of itself. And so there's so many details of what would be confusing for someone having that dramatic shift, that when you go through it gradually,
Mm.
as I have, then it's very clear and I could explain what's happening.
Right.
So that whole very long response to the question of your either the question about healing or
Mm.
pain or something that's happening in the physical body, is I'm seeing everything in harmonic resonance and holographic inseparability.
Hmm. No, you answered it perfectly. You're seeing it from a layering effect. You're seeing it in everything we are. It's just probably the way I'm explaining it too. I'm trying to understand it. It's fascinating to hear you explain everything because it makes me wonder if as we evolve, human beings, if we are heading into this direction of healing. I don't know whether it's where spirituality and science merges together or we have a better understanding, but we've obviously been going through some interesting times in the last little while, being human. And I've always brought up the fact that if you even look at ancient civilizations, some of them had stronger belief systems that we don't, and approach death even different than we do now. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to have growing pains in order to grow. And I think that's what humans have been going through. I think that's what I see. And I actually, you said as a collective, you mentioned the word collective, and I wanted to ask because I always ask everybody this. It's always the same. The way I kind of, as we veer near the end of our conversation here, I always try to gather information as to why, as a collective, do you see why we incarnate here? What is our reasoning for this? You know, before you answer that, when I was a kid, I when I was a teenager, as you were going through your moments as a teenager, I would be walking and I'd have moments of confusion where I'd see my arms swaying and I'd be walking to high school and I'd be looking at my hands. And people probably think I was tripping out on something. I was completely fine. But I was looking at my hands and thinking, what is this? Like, what is this thing? Like, when I do this, it does this. And when I do that, and no one else, like, no one that I talked to at my age was having those thoughts. There, maybe some of them were. I'm sure there were because there was me. So I'm sure others were, but they weren't talking about it. And I would be kind of like, I'd be like, oh, isn't that interesting? But why? And so I've always had this obsession with the question of reasoning, of maybe it's my truth seeking. So this is a long way of asking the question, but why do you believe we're here?
I'd love to link this back to what you were sharing just a moment before, in that all the wildness that's been happening lately, and also why are we here? Like both of those I'd love to respond to.
Sure, absolutely.
So for me, it's just it's just such an incredible time to be here, that the energies that are coming in are supporting a rapid acceleration of awakening. And part of my purpose in being here is that evolutionary boost. And when you were saying that earlier, I started to just get excited around how extraordinary it is to be here at this time.
Mhm.
And we get to have different experiences in the universe. And being on this precious planet is an extraordinary gift. And we are the whole thing. When we open up to those larger embodiments of ourself, we are the universe, and all the planets are part of our body. And we create ourself in layers for that embodied experience, because there's miracles that can happen here in ways that are unique, that we wouldn't get to experience in another way. And as we keep surrendering back into that inner truth and trusting, and tuning more into that radio frequency station on the inside, then it changes how we relate to being here. And we can be flooded with those frequencies of unconditional love and wholeness and truth and compassion and understanding. And from there, one can open to the bliss of why we're here, the beauty of why we're here, the gift of why we're here, the opportunity of why we're here, and the preciousness of why we're here.
Wow. Okay. So that was, I love how you put them both together. And I love it because it's a positive. We're leaving it on a positive. I've always been optimistic of everything. I don't know. I don't know what that's about, but I'm always optimistic about most things in life. And, when some people say, wow, life is so difficult. Like, why did I choose to come here? I always have this feeling of, um, the life can be beautiful. And you were summing it up in the sense of how it's a blessing to be here. But some people will look at what they've gone through in their life and say, how is that a blessing? Right? Like I've gone through all this turmoil or I've gone through this, right? But I think when we're on the other side, I think when we're on the other side of this, we see it as I want to be there. Like it's a the experience itself is amazing, right? So it's about getting ourselves in alignment with who we truly are, I think, is what moves us in that direction. So, you know, you summed it up beautifully. I just wanted to put my 2 cents in and say that I do see the optimism in who we are and where we're going and how we're shifting. And we are at a very interesting time. Because these conversations, I've said, these conversations 30, 40 years ago wouldn't have been, not that they wouldn't have been allowed, but they would have been scoffed at a lot more. And now we can have these conversations and people are resonating with them. So, and they're available for people to see. So, I really want to just thank you so much for coming on and speaking today to the Soul Inspired family. It's been amazing. I never know what I'm getting myself into. And then I talk to someone I know I could sit with them for another 3 hours. I say it all the time because it's true. I don't feel, time is limiting, unfortunately. That's the one thing I'm working with right now. And I'm trying to figure that part out. But um, you'd be more than welcome to ever come back because I think there's a lot more we could tune into. But I just appreciate your time today, and I would also suggest to everybody that's been listening to please continue to like, share, and subscribe to the Soul Inspired, and share this video with someone if you think it would resonate with them. And but thank you so much, Kristen, for being on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd love to actually add just one more sentence in
Sure.
relation to what you just shared, which is there's a way you were speaking about, we want that as if it's in the distant future, that we want that thing that's far away. And the power is in surrender, and that distant place is not actually distant, it's actually immediate. It's immediately here. And
Mm.
so to go back and maybe listen to what we spoke about earlier about that surrendering into that truth and through the fears and all of that, because it's the power to change what's happening now, the power of making the difficulties that are happening now into miracles is actually through surrender. And it sounds crazy, but it's actually the truth. And that when you surrender in on the inside and open up to the infinite spaciousness, that's where the power is to change everything. And that joy and love and truth and peace and ease that one is looking for
Mm.
on the outside is actually immediately available on the inside always.
And that comes along with surrendering, and I love
That's right.
that. That's beautiful. Well, thank you again so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank
Total
you.
delight being here.